Have you ever questioned whether something is wrong with you after an inner awakening because it doesn't feel like freedom, but rather like a fracture? Why does hardly anyone talk about the fact that truth not only opens doors, but first takes away everything you relied upon? Many speak of light, insight, and peace, yet few discuss what comes before that, the moment when old beliefs suddenly feel hollow, when goals no longer carry meaning, when relationships become fragile, even though no one has done anything wrong. Why does awakening feel for so many not like liberation, but like an inner collapse? Why do people lose their old lives, their security, their sense of belonging after seeking truth? And why is this rarely spoken about honestly? Perhaps because this phase is not romantic, not enlightened, not something to showcase. Perhaps because awakening does not build up at first, but rather strips away. It takes away your illusions, your roles, your certainties, and leaves you for a time without guidance. If you recognize yourself in this, if you see yourself reflected here, then write it in the comments. Did your awakening feel more like liberation or like an inner loss? You are not alone. And this story begins right here. Awakening rarely starts with light. It begins with a break. Not spectacular, not ceremonial, but quietly and profoundly unsettling. For most people, this moment does not come as an epiphany, but as an irritation. Something is no longer right. Not outside, inside. Things that once made sense suddenly do not hold anymore. Goals feel hollow, beliefs seem thin, identities that once provided support begin to flicker. Not because they were wrong, but because they have become too small. Awakening almost always begins with disillusionment. And disillusionment does not mean losing something, but rather ceasing to believe in something. Yet that feels like loss at first. For illusion is not merely deception, it is structure. It organizes life. It explains who we are, why we are here, what matters and what does not. When this structure falls away, it is not just a thought that collapses. A whole inner edifice crumbles. Many describe this moment as emptiness, but that is not entirely accurate. It is not nothingness. It is a space in between. The old no longer holds. The new is not yet tangible, and it is precisely here that uncertainty arises. Old beliefs begin to feel empty. Not because they are objectively wrong, but because they no longer resonate. Perhaps success was once your measure, or security, or recognition, or spiritual promises. Suddenly you realize it no longer fulfills you. Not out of ingratitude, not out of arrogance, but because your inner coordinate system has shifted. This is one of the most painful aspects of awakening. You can no longer honestly believe in what once sustained you, and this pertains not only to thoughts, but to identities. You may have defined yourself through your role, as the strong one, as the rational one, as the helper, as the seeker, as the successful one, as the spiritual one. Yet suddenly this role no longer fits. It feels tight or foreign or empty, not because it is wrong, but because it is no longer complete. This moment does not feel like realization. It feels like loss. For identity is security, and when it crumbles, the sense of control crumbles too. Many people try to avoid this point. They sense the cracks, and they patch them up. They seek new concepts, new explanations, new spiritual systems, new roles, everything to save the old stability. Yet awakening cannot be repaired. It can only be traversed. The moment when the illusion shatters is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. For illusion does not break because it is attacked, but because it is no longer needed. Yet one only understands this later. In the moment itself, it feels as if something is being taken away. The world suddenly seems flatter, conversations shallower, goals artificial, explanations inadequate. Not because everything has worsened, but because you have deepened, and depth exposes. This is the point at which many believe they have become depressed, or lost, or have taken a wrong turn. Yet often it is not a sickness, it is a disillusionment, a shedding of deception. Awakening does not begin with answers. It begins with the loss of questions that can no longer be asked honestly. What should I achieve? How do I come across? What do others expect from me? These questions lose their power, and that is frightening. For without these questions, one does not know for a time what to orient oneself by. The moment when the illusion shatters is a moment without guidance. No clear direction, no new promise, no immediate meaning, only honesty. And honesty is raw. It says, what has defined you until now no longer carries you. Not because it was bad, but because you no longer stand where it makes sense. This moment separates people. Some retreat. They seal the cracks. They explain it all away as a phase, or a mistake, or overwhelm. Others can no longer go back. Not out of pride, but because their inner selves no longer cooperate. For them, the illusion has once become visible, and visibility cannot be undone. The break remains, and with it the inkling, there is no going back to what was once taken for granted. Yet here lies the core of this phase. The moment when the illusion shatters is not the end of meaning, but the end of borrowed meaning. It is the point at which nothing works anymore that is not real, and that feels like loss, because authenticity is first empty, still without form, still without language, still without security. But it is precisely in this emptiness that space is created. Not immediately, not comfortably, not romantically, but real. Awakening does not begin with light, but with the courage to remain in the dark without deceiving oneself. And this moment, painful as it is not a failure. It is the first honest step. There is a phase after the inner break in which everything looks the same on the outside, and yet everything has shifted on the inside. You go to work. You meet the same people. You live in the same spaces. You fulfill the same roles. And yet everything feels foreign, and not wrong in a moral sense. Not bad, not dramatic. Rather, no longer resonant. Many people initially believe they have become ungrateful, or bored, or overwhelmed. But that's not quite it. What has changed is not your life, but your relationship to it. Work that once motivated you suddenly feels empty, not because it lacks value, but because it no longer carries meaning. You complete tasks, but they no longer touch you. You function, yet something within you remains disengaged, not out of arrogance, not out of laziness, but out of disconnection. Your inner self has detached from the external structures that once provided identity. The same happens in relationships. People who were once close to you suddenly are no longer in the same way. Conversations linger on the surface. Topics repeat themselves. Reactions feel predictable. You are present, but no longer truly involved. Many describe this state as inner distance, yet it is not emotional coldness. It is a shift in perception. You hear not only what is being said, but also why it is being said. You sense roles, expectations, defense mechanisms, and suddenly closeness becomes exhausting when it is based solely on habit. Not because you love people less, but because you see them more clearly. Routines that once provided security now feel mechanical. You get up, you do what needs to be done, you go to sleep. And somewhere in between, you quietly ask yourself, why am I doing this really? Not in a rebellious way, not out of defiance, but as a genuine existential question. This phase is particularly difficult to explain, for from the outside your life appears normal. You have lost nothing. No obvious crisis, no visible catastrophe. And precisely because of this, you doubt yourself. You tell yourself, I should be grateful. Others would be happy. I'm exaggerating. But gratitude does not replace resonance. You can be grateful and still feel out of place. One of the most painful elements of this phase is that you distance yourself internally without removing yourself externally. You are still there, but you no longer belong. Not because you are being excluded, but because your inner self no longer fits. Many try in this moment to go back. They tell themselves, "I'll pull myself together. I'll be like I was before. This is just a phase." They intensify their adaptation. They invest more energy into functioning. They play their role more perfectly than ever before. Yet this only deepens the fracture. For adaptation without inner consent creates inner tension. The more you try to fit back into your old life, the more you feel that it no longer fits. It feels like failure, like ingratitude, like missed development. But in truth, you are not failing at life. You are failing at a version of yourself that no longer exists. You cannot go back, for what once embedded you no longer aligns with what you now perceive. This is not failure. It is a consequence. Many report that during this phase they feel a deep loneliness, even in the midst of people, not because no one is there, but because no one sees you where you now stand. For you can hardly explain yourself. Not without seeming banal or aloof. Not without risking misunderstanding, so you remain silent. And silence amplifies the feeling of being wrong. Yet this silence is often a form of self-protection, for your inner self is in motion, and motion requires space. The old life no longer fits because it was built on assumptions that you no longer share, perhaps on achievement, or security, or conformity, or role distribution, or clear expectations. These assumptions worked, as long as you believed in them. Now you no longer believe, and without belief they lose their binding power. That is the point at which many despair. They ask, "What is wrong with me? Why can't I simply be content? Why have I become so complicated?" But perhaps you have not become complicated. Perhaps you have become more precise in discerning what feels true and what merely feels familiar. The old life no longer fits, because it no longer aligns with your inner standard. And this standard is not chosen, it has formed itself, not through decision, but through realization. Many people get stuck at this point, not because they cannot move forward, but because they hope that things will return to how they once were. Yet that is precisely the illusion. It will not be like it was before, and that is not a loss, but a transition, even if it initially feels like an inner exile. When your old life no longer fits, it does not mean that you have lost your life. It means that you are no longer willing to lose yourself in order to continue it, and that is not an end. It is the moment when your life stops merely functioning and begins to become honest, even if you do not yet know what the new should look like. Sometimes the only thing you can do in this phase is not to go back, and that is precisely the first step forward. One of the most honest yet rarely spoken aspects of awakening is this: it does not connect, it separates. Not out of arrogance, not out of rejection, not because one suddenly no longer likes others, but because perception shifts. Awakening does not first change the world, but the way you experience it, and therein lies the separation. Many people expect that consciousness creates closeness, that understanding connects, that truth deepens community. Yet experience often shows the opposite. The clearer you see, the harder it becomes to remain on the same level as before. Conversations that once carried weight suddenly feel empty. Not wrong, but shallow. Small talk feels like noise, repetitions like stagnation, dramas like plays whose script you already know. And you realize you are no longer truly involved, not because you feel superior, but because your inner self resonates on a different frequency. This makes closeness difficult, for closeness is not only born from time, but from shared assumptions of reality. When these assumptions diverge, distance arises, even among those you love. Many describe this phase as a painful loneliness, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of no longer being understood. You sit at a table with people and feel alone. You laugh along, but something within you remains silent. Then you listen, but you are no longer truly meant to be there. This is particularly painful because it happens gradually. No one pushes you away. No one consciously leaves you. There is no conflict to resolve, only a growing inner distance. Why does this happen? Because awakening is not just realization, but disillusionment. You see roles, mechanisms, unconscious repetitions, avoidance strategies, and as soon as you see them, you can no longer play along with innocence. Not because you don't want to, but because your inner self refuses. Many people respond to this with inner withdrawal. Not out of arrogance, but out of protection. You begin to explain less, to discuss less, to share less. Because you realize words are no longer enough. What you experience cannot simply be told without being trivialized or misunderstood. So you become quieter, and silence is often interpreted as distance. Others feel that you are no longer fully present, that you no longer react as you used to, that you are withdrawing. Some respond with confusion, others with rejection, still others with fear, because your transformation unsettles their balance, not because you attack them, but because you no longer confirm what was once taken for granted. Awakening separates because it dissolves the shared illusion that often carries closeness. And that is precisely what makes one lonely. For illusion is connective. Truth is isolating. Not because truth is cold, but because it is individual. Each person awakens alone. There is no collective moment in which everyone understands simultaneously. There are only individual breaks, and these breaks change relationships. Some quietly crumble, others become charged with tension. Still others remain outwardly intact, but are empty inside. Many report that after awakening they did not become happier, but lonelier. This contradicts many spiritual narratives, and that is exactly why it is rarely spoken of openly. Yet this loneliness is not a sign of failure. It is a transitional phase, a phase in which you detach from collective patterns without yet knowing new forms of connection. For old closeness no longer works. New closeness is not yet there. It feels like an inner no man's land. Many try to compensate for this loneliness. They seek like-minded souls, communities, spiritual spaces. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't, because even there it quickly becomes apparent. Consciousness can also become a role. Depth can also become an identity. Even awakened ones can misunderstand each other. The true loneliness of awakening is not the absence of people. It is the absence of resonance. You do not seek company, you seek authenticity, and authenticity is rare because it wears no mask. Awakening means that you are no longer willing to purchase closeness at the price of self-denial. And that drastically reduces connections at first. Yet this reduction is not a loss of love but of compromise. Many people are not lonely throughout their lives because they adapt. Awakening takes away this possibility. You can no longer play at closeness. You can no longer simulate connection, and that feels like isolation. Yet this isolation has a function. It forces you to keep yourself company, without distraction, without mirrors, without affirmation. That is uncomfortable, sometimes painful, often shattering, but it is honest. And an inner loneliness is the space where you learn not to be held from the outside anymore, not by roles, not by expectations, not by belonging, but by your own presence. Many flee from this space, back into old patterns, or into new dependencies. Yet those who stay discover something crucial. This loneliness is not the end of connection. It is the end of false connection. And that creates space. Not immediately, not comfortably, but authentically. For true closeness does not arise from equality, but from authenticity. And authenticity first requires distance from everything that is not real. Awakening separates because it clarifies, and clarification initially feels like loss. But perhaps this phase is not meant to isolate you. Perhaps it is meant to prepare you for a form of connection that is no longer based on roles, but on being. And until then, loneliness is not a mistake. Rather, it is a passage, a space where you learn to stay with yourself, even when no one walks alongside you. And it is precisely there that a different kind of closeness begins, quieter, more genuine, non-negotiable, not with everyone, but with the right ones. After the first break, after the estrangement from the old life, after the isolation, often comes what few talk about. A dark phase, silent, confusing, and without a map. Awakening is rarely accompanied, not because it is unimportant, but because it cannot be planned. There is no universally accepted language for it, no fixed framework, no societal narrative that captures this state. Those who arrive here often stand alone. Not because no one wants to help, but because hardly anyone knows how. This phase feels like a fracture without guidance. You know you cannot go back, but you also do not know where to go. The old is gone. The new is not yet here. And it is precisely in this in-between that fear, crises of meaning, and disorientation arise, not as a mistake, but as a logical consequence. For meaning is not an abstract concept, it is an inner navigation system. When old meanings fall away, this system loses its reference points. Many describe this time as inner emptiness. Yet emptiness is not the opposite of meaning. It is the moment when meaning has not yet taken form. That feels threatening. For human beings are not made to live without significance, so the nervous system reacts with restlessness, with fear, with inner pressure. Not because something is going wrong, but because orientation is lacking. This phase is often misunderstood from the outside and by those affected themselves. Many think, I have become depressed. I have lost myself. I am broken. Yet not every darkness is illness. Not every emptiness is deficit. Not every fear is a sign of weakness. Sometimes it is the moment when old psychological structures collapse because they have fulfilled their purpose. Awakening is rarely accompanied because it is not normalized. It fits into no category. Too existential for everyday conversations. Too quiet for spiritual staging. Too raw for quick solutions, so one remains alone. Many seek help and encounter misunderstanding. Some receive diagnoses. Others receive advice. Still others receive silence. Yet hardly anyone says, yes, and this is part of it. This phase is not a sign that you have taken a wrong turn. It is the price of no longer living on borrowed meaning. Fear arises here because control is absent, not external control, but inner certainty. You no longer know what you are doing or why you are doing it, where you are going, who you are becoming. And that is precisely what breeds fear, not the truth itself, but the absence of orientation. Crises of meaning do not arise because nothing has meaning, but because old meaning has crumbled. And decay is a process. It requires time and space and silence. Yet our world hardly allows for that. It demands function, explanation, performance. So one tries to skip this phase with distraction, with optimization, with new identities. But darkness cannot be circumvented. It can only be traversed. A particularly painful aspect of this phase is the confusion with depression. Yes, there are overlaps, exhaustion, withdrawal, loss of meaning, inner emptiness. Yet there is a crucial difference. Depression pulls you away from life. This phase pulls you deeper into life, not into activity, but into honesty. You do not want to disappear. You want to understand. You do not want to stop feeling. You feel too much. You do not want nothing anymore. You just do not know what. This distinction is important, for those who pathologize this phase try to fix it, instead of accompanying it, and that is precisely what prolongs the pain. Awakening without guidance is not dangerous, not because it is wrong, but because it happens in solitude. Many lose courage here, not because they are weak, but because they believe they are alone. Yet this phase is older than any modern psychology. Mystics, thinkers, seekers of all times knew this state. They called it dark night, or desert, or emptiness, not as punishment, but as transition. A space where everything that is not essential falls away. That is frightening because the ego has no tools here. No roles, no goals, no successes, only presence. And presence without distraction feels raw. Yet it is precisely here that something new emerges, not immediately, not visible, not spectacular, but real. The dark phase is not a pit into which one falls. It is a space in which one stands still, and stillness is unfamiliar in a world that confuses movement with progress. Many ask in this phase, how long will this last? When will it get better? What should I do? Yet these questions still belong to old thinking. This phase cannot be accelerated, cannot be circumvented, cannot be optimized. It demands only one thing. Stay. Do not fight. Do not flee. Do not explain. Stay. That is hard. For staying without an answer requires trust, not in a concept, not in a doctrine, but in the process itself. Awakening without guidance feels like flying blind. Yet flying blind is only dangerous when one believes one must land immediately. Perhaps this phase is not meant to destroy you. Perhaps it is meant to dissolve everything that has held you until now, so that you no longer need to be held. Not by ideas, not by roles, and again not from expectations, but from yourself. This dark phase is not a destination. It is a passage, and even though it feels like aimlessness, it is in truth a realignment, not towards something external, but towards what remains when nothing else supports you. And it is precisely there that something begins that can no longer break, not because it is strong, but because it is real. No genuine awakening occurs without loss, not because loss is sought, but because nothing new can arise as long as the old still holds. This is one of the uncomfortable truths that hardly anyone wants to hear. A person does not change as long as their previous structures function. Not out of malice, not out of ignorance, but out of inner logic. As long as an identity provides support, as long as a worldview explains, as long as roles create security, there is no reason to go deeper. Awakening begins where these supports fail, not abruptly, but insidiously. The old loses its power, not because it is wrong, but because it is no longer sufficient. And it is precisely here that the break occurs. Many people ask, why must it be so painful? Why can't realization be gentle? Why does truth take away first instead of giving? The answer is sober and radically honest, because truth adds nothing. It removes. It does not add new concepts, no new roles, no new promises. It strips away what is no longer true. Liberation is not growth in the classical sense. It is reduction. It takes away false securities, foreign expectations, borrowed meanings, unconscious adaptations. And that is precisely what feels like a break. For what falls away was part of your stability. Even if it was no longer true, it held you. That is why nothing new can arise as long as the old still holds. As long as you cling to old identities, no new form can emerge. As long as you use old explanations, no new clarity can appear. Truth needs space, and space is created only when something departs. Many try to experience awakening without loss. They want realization plus security, depth plus comfort, truth plus belonging. But that does not work, not because it would be forbidden, but because it is contradictory. You cannot see deeper and simultaneously retain everything that was built on repression. The break is necessary because it is the only thing that frees you from false support. Not everything that held you has nourished you. Some things have merely fixed you in place. Liberation, therefore, does not mean that you become more, but that you become less. Less role, less pretense, less defense, less self-deception. And that is precisely what evokes fear. For humanity confuses being more with being safer. Yet safety is often merely the absence of truth. Why does truth take first? Because it promises nothing that it cannot keep. Illusions promise comfort. Truth promises nothing. It simply says, this is real and this is not. And what is not real must go, even if it was familiar, even if it was loved, even if it had long been part of your story. This break is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of precision. Truth is precise. None, and she does not cut everything away, only that which binds you, but does not carry you. Many people experience this process as unjust. They say, I haven't done anything wrong. Why is everything being taken from me? Why does honesty feel so harsh? Yet truth is not moral. It is structural. It follows no system of rewards, no karma, no idea of fairness. It follows only one principle: coherence. What is no longer coherent falls away, not as punishment, but out of necessity. The break is necessary because only in the collapse does it become visible what truly carries. As long as the old remains, you do not know if you can carry yourself. Only when external supports fall away does it reveal whether inner ones exist, and that is frightening. For many discover here, they have relied their entire lives on structures that did not come from within themselves, on recognition, on roles, on systems, on securities. The break takes away these crutches, not to let you fall, but to see if you can stand. Many do not fail because of the break, but because of their resistance to it. They cling, they explain, they rationalize, they flee. Yet resistance prolongs the pain. Not because resistance is wrong, but because it conserves the old. The break only becomes a liberation when you stop preventing it. That is the turning point. Not when everything is over, but when you stop hoping that it will be like it was before. For before was built on illusion, and illusion no longer carries. Truth takes first because it is not ready to give you something new as long as you hold on to the old. It waits, not in punishment, not in judgment, but consistently. Many people experience exactly here a paradoxical realization. The less they hold on, the calmer it becomes. The more they let go, the clearer it gets. Not euphoric, not enlightened, but still. And stillness is the first sign that the break has done its work. The break is not the goal, it is the gate, a gate through which only what is real can pass. Everything else remains behind, not because it was bad, but because it no longer defines you. Perhaps this is the greatest lie about awakening, that it is an ascent. In truth, it is a descent from concepts, from roles, from securities, toward something that needs no proof. The break is necessary because truth does not adorn, it strips away, and only without masks does something begin that can no longer break, not because it is invulnerable, but because it no longer pretends to be something it is not. Perhaps this is the true liberation, not that everything will be good, but that nothing false remains, and for that everything false must first go, even if it hurts, even if it takes time, even if no one applauds, for truth does not work for recognition, it works for clarity, and clarity only arises where nothing is carried anymore that does not truly carry. The break is no accident, it is the consequence of having stopped lying to yourself. And perhaps that is precisely the moment when your life truly begins for the first time. An awakening promises no better life. It takes away the false one and forces you to move forward without illusions. Perhaps it doesn't feel like freedom right now. Perhaps it feels more like emptiness, like loss, like a solitude that no one sees. But maybe that is precisely the point at which your life stops numbing you and begins to take you seriously. Not with comfort, not with promises, but with truth. If you have stayed this far, it is not because it was easy, but because something within you knows that there is no turning back. Subscribe to this channel if you want to be part of a community that does not flee when silence falls. Like this video so that this uncomfortable truth reaches others who are losing themselves in it. Share it if you know someone who is breaking apart and believes they are alone. And now a sincere question for you, not for the algorithm, but for your inner self. What is the first thing you lost since you stopped lying to yourself? Write it in the comments. Here, truth is allowed to exist, spirit to spirit. Your Zeitgeist.